Okay, chapter 9. It's empty, Logan asked. Did it spill out? The others looked just as confused as he did. Philip felt around in his jacket pocket. I don't feel anything. The Candymaker smiled. What did you see when you looked in? Our faces, Logan replied, uncertain. The bottom was mirrored. And what do you think Steve and Lenny see when they look in? His father asked. Or me or Max? I guess everyone would see his own face, Logan said, his brow furrowing. His father nodded. That's right, and that's our secret ingredient. We put a little of ourselves into our chocolate. Daisy beamed and reached out for the tin. I know exactly what you mean, she said. I felt like that when I was in the lab, like I was a part of what I was making. Exactly, the candy maker said. To tell you the truth, every candy factory has the same tin. It's a tradition passed down from candy maker to candy maker. It's what makes each factory's candy taste distinctly their own. Philip's jaw fell open. You mean to say there's no secret ingredient at all? At any of the candy factories? The candy maker shook his head. We all select our own ingredients, of course, and prepare them in a certain way. And where the cocoa beans are harvested makes a huge difference in taste. But that's about it. Philip burst out laughing, following by Daisy, Miles, and Logan. Someday you can tell me what you all find so funny, the candy maker said, sticking the tin into his own pocket. But I've got to get back out there. He put his hand on Philip's still convulsing shoulder. Congratulations. I hope Life is Sweet is chosen to produce your harmonic candy. Great name, by the way. Barely able to catch his breath, Philip gasped. Miles thought of it. Did he? The candy maker asked. We always have room at the factory for someone good with words. Miles beamed, his eyes glassy with tears from laughing. The candy maker chuckled as he left them. You four are going to be trouble, I can tell. That made them laugh even harder. For a moment, Logan forgot that Philip's dad would be on his way up any minute. When he arrived, everything would turn upside down again. But it wouldn't be about taking over the factory. It would be a lot more personal than that. Last chapter is the next day. Daisy leaned against the maple tree and opened her comm device. Her mother's face quickly came into view. Gone were the snowy mountaintops of a few days ago. In their place were palm trees and a small hut. Her parents must be on a new mission already. Hi, honey, her mom said, adjusting her straw hat to block out the bright sun. Don't hi, honey, me, Daisy scolded. I'm 13? Seriously? Her mom's smile wavered a bit. Oh, found out about that, eh? I guess that means it's true, Daisy said, even though she'd known it was the moment AJ had told her. We were going to tell you before your next birthday. Well, now you don't have to. Her mother sighed. AJ warned me this might not be a pleasant call. Daisy narrowed her eyes at the screen. When did you talk to AJ? Last night when you guys got home from your mission. But I tried to reach you all night and your coordinates just flashed "we're away" at me. Her mom adjusted her hat again. Well, I may be avoiding your call a bit. Mom? Sorry, hun, but I wanted to give you some time to cool off. AJ told me you were a bit emotional. You're usually so level-headed. Daisy sighed. I know. I'm not really too mad at you. The last couple days have been very strange. How did the job at the candy factory go? Daisy hesitated. How could she possibly explain everything in a few minutes? It was going to be hard enough to tell her grandmother later. She'd feigned exhaustion when she and AJ had returned from the convention last night, and she'd left the house this morning before her grandmother could catch up with her. Can you just wait to read it in my report? Sure, if you'd like. Her mother came closer to the lens. Is everything all right? Well, I was wondering, is it all right if I take a little break from being the whole spy biz? Just a few months, go to a real school, that sort of thing. Just to kind of think about everything. Her mother raised one eyebrow but didn't seem as surprised as Daisy thought she'd be. Of course, just because you're good at something doesn't mean you have to do it. Maybe you have another path in life. I do love being a spy, Daisy insisted, mostly, but I'm hoping things can change a little, like I want to pick my own cases. We can talk about it when your father and I get home next week. Daisy brightened. You're coming home? Her mother nodded. For at least a week. We'll have plenty of time to catch up on everything. I have a feeling you have quite a story for me. Her mother leaned in close again and looked around. Hey, where are you? All I see is the bark of a tree. Daisy turned her book so her mother could see the lake, the boats moored on the sandy beach. When she turned it back around, her mother asked, "Is that Verona Park?" Daisy nodded. What takes you back there?" Daisy smiled. "I'm waiting for some friends." Her mother raised her eyebrows again. "Wow, that's new. Anyone I know?" Daisy shook her head. Movement along the path on the far side of the lake caught her eye. "I've got to go, Mom. I think they're here. Say hi to Dad for me." "Have fun, honey. We'll see you in a week. We're just making a quick pit stop to see your brother, then we'll be home." Daisy drew a sharp breath. "My what?" Her mom waved at the screen as it darkened. "Bye, honey. See you soon." "Wait, my what?" Daisy frantically pressed buttons, but only got her mother's "we're away" message. Daisy groaned in frustration, shut the book, and laid it down in the grass. She and her parents were seriously going to have to talk about the importance of honesty in a parent-child relationship. Miles saw the girl leaning against the tree, so much like the girl from his memory, but this time he knew what was going to happen next, and it wouldn't involve her running into the water and not coming back up. He waved, she waved back. His father untethered the rowboat from the post sticking out of the water. "You're sure you're ready to do this?" Miles nodded. "It'll be good." "Is that her?" his father asked, following Miles's gaze up the beach. "Yep." Last night he told his parents about Daisy, leaving out the fact that the reason she'd swum under the water was that it was part of her spy training. At first they'd been really upset and even angry at Daisy and her parents for doing a stunt like that. But he tried to convince them that all the distress he'd gone through and had not been for nothing. He had figured out a lot about his life in the past year that he knew would have otherwise. He would never have otherwise. He knew they were still upset, but he also knew they'd slept better last night than they had all year. In fact, his mom was still asleep. "Well, I'll leave you then," his father said, checking that the boat was secure on the sand. "You have everything you need?" Miles smiled, "and more." And if the universe and everything in it might not actually exist, as one of the books from the factory's library had told him, then at least he'd made 3 friends. 3. He's talking backwards. I can't read it. "That's the boat?" Philip asked, joining Daisy on the walk down to the lake. "You were expecting a yacht? And what are you wearing?" Philip looked down at his Hawaiian shirt, long shorts, and tube socks that nearly reached his knees. "What's this? Isn't this what people wear outdoors?" "Not normal people. I can barely see your face under that hat." He pushed the visor up a little. "That's the point. No sunburn." Reggie had given him the outfit and the hat and the sunblock, bug spray, and canteen filled with water, which were in his duffel bag. Reggie had tried to tell him he didn't need all the supplies for 1 hour on the lake, but Philip had insisted on bringing everything. If he had to be outdoors, he needed to protect himself from the elements as completely as possible. They had almost reached the beach when Daisy stopped and put her hand on his arm. He didn't even flinch this time. "Have you spoken to Logan?" she asked. Philip shook his head. "Not since my dad showed up at the convention yesterday. Logan's father kind of dragged him away." Daisy nodded. "I know. That was weird. I didn't see him after that either. I hope he's okay." Philip nodded. He was eager to talk to Logan, too. He had something to give him. He also wanted to tell him that when his father found out about his violin playing, thanks to the Candymaker's wife, he hadn't freaked out. All he'd asked was, "Are you any good?" Philip had nodded, and his father said, "Okay, then." That might not sound like a lot to most people, but for them, it had been a real bonding moment. "Let's ask Miles if he'd spoken to Logan," he suggested as they started walking again. Daisy agreed. But by the time they reached Miles, they saw Logan approaching from the other direction. Philip was relieved to see that he looked perfectly normal, as usual, his usual happy self. "I have something to give you," Philip said to Logan when they all met by the water's edge. "And I have something for you," he replied. "I have something for Logan, too," Daisy said. "I don't have anything for anyone," Miles shouted. They all laughed. Philip opened his duffel bag and pulled out a violin case. "This is yours. I meant to give it to you yesterday, but I couldn't find you." "Max took me home," Logan said hurriedly. Philip waited for him to explain why, but he didn't. He just took the violin case, balancing it awkwardly. Did you just say this is mine? Logan asked. Philip nodded. I took it from the storeroom down the hall from the lab. Logan held it back out to him. You should keep it. Trust me, Philip said. You want this violin. If anyone tries to buy the factory again, this could buy you 2 new factories. Really? Logan and Daisy and Miles all asked at the same time. Philip nodded. It's very old and very rare. Hey, Daisy asked. You never told us why you brought it with you to the contest in the first place. I'm not really sure, Philip admitted. I think I just wanted it near me. Taking it had been a last-minute decision. He'd hidden it in the duffel bag Reggie brought to the factory. Philip was supposed to put his dirty clothes in there. Instead, the clothes went in the back seat of the limo along with his briefcase, and the violin went into the duffel. It's kind of hard to explain. Ah, the special relationship between a boy and his violin, Miles said. Who are we to question such a pairing? Philip stepped forward and kicked Miles in the shin. You ain't got nothing on Daisy, Miles said, pointing to a big purple bruise under his left knee. I did that, Daisy squealed. I'm really sorry. Logan laid the violin case down next to himself and reached into his pocket. This is for you. Philip reached out his hand and Logan gave him a small box, about the size of 2 decks of cards. He couldn't imagine what was in it, unless it actually was 2 decks of cards, which seemed unlikely. This goes with it, Logan said, handing him a folded piece of paper. Should I open them now? Logan asked. Daisy reached into her pocketbook and pulled out a large brown envelope. She handed it to Logan. I thought you might want this. Logan turned the envelope around in his hands. He held it up to the sun but couldn't see through it. Well, at least I know it's not a violin, he said with a grin. Well, I don't have any mysterious envelopes or packages, but I've got a boat rented for the next hour, Miles said, tapping the side of the rowboat with his foot. Make that the next 50 minutes now. We're all supposed to fit in that thing? Philip asked, casting a doubtful look at the boat. Is it even seaworthy? Actually, Logan said, I'm going to wait on the beach. Why? Miles asked with concern. You love rowboats. I know, but I'd kind of like to be somewhere else when Philip opens that box. Philip almost dropped it. Nothing will jump out at me, will it? Or smell really bad? Logan smiled. I guess you're going to have to take your chances. Hey, Daisy said, we'll be on that boat too. Don't worry, you'll all make it back to shore unharmed. Unless Philip is rowing, then you better be wearing your life vests. Got that covered, Miles said, pointing to the 4 life jackets piled in the front of the boat. Philip rolled his eyes. He couldn't help it. Let's get this over with, he said, nudging the boat closer to the water with his foot. He was eager to open the box, which was wrapped in blue paper like a present. He didn't often get presents. Do you want me to stay here with you, Daisy asked Logan. Logan shook his head. I'll be fine. He reached into the boat and grabbed one of his life jackets. I hear this makes a good pillow. That it does, Daisy said. Miles pushed the boat the rest of the way into the water. All right, climb in, guys. Philip couldn't help noticing the 2 feet of water beneath the shoreline and the boat. How are we supposed to get in? Like this, Miles said, pulling off his sneakers and socks and stepping in. It looks cold, Philip said, taking a step backward. Oi, Daisy exclaimed. She tossed her bag into the boat on top of the life jackets, then marched over to Philip. Without a word of warning, she reached out, grabbed him around the waist, and hoisted him over her shoulder. Philip was so surprised he couldn't even shout out. His hat fell off onto the beach, but he only half noticed. Daisy carried him out to the boat, which had now drifted a few feet farther into the lake. By the time he recovered from the shock, she'd plopped him down in the middle bench between the 2 oars. There, she said with a satisfied nod. You didn't even get splashed. Philip could see Miles and Logan doubled over laughing on the shore. Hey, he shouted, his cheeks hot with embarrassment. At least I'm dry. Do you want me to come back for you, Miles? Daisy called out. Miles bounded into the water. No thanks, he said, reaching the side of the boat. You should have seen your face, he told Philip. Priceless. I'll never forget it. I'm so glad, Philip said, wishing he could think of a better comeback. The boat rocked as Miles climbed in, and Philip clutched both sides to steady it. Why people wanted to be in boats he couldn't imagine. Daisy jumped in last. She picked up the oars and gestured for Philip to move to the back bench. He didn't need to be asked twice. He had no interest in rowing. Miles tossed each of them a life jacket as the boat began to move. Philip looked down at the box and the folded paper still clutched in his hand. He was surprised he hadn't dropped them in the lake when Daisy picked him up. He doubted he'd ever live that down, but truth be told, he was kind of pleased that he didn't have to get wet. "Are you going to open it?" Miles asked. "I guess," Philip said. He placed the box on his lap and unfolded the paper. "It's a letter." "Is it to all of us or just you?" Daisy asked, twisting her head around to see. "Hey, eyes forward," Philip commanded. Daisy groaned, but turned back around. "Remind me never to drive you anywhere when I get my license, which, as you know, will be a year before you guys get yours." "No problem there, if this is how you drive on water," Philip replied. He looked back down at the letter. "It's addressed just to me." "You should read it to yourself then," Miles said. Philip nodded. "It's probably just about the contest," but it wasn't. "Dear Philip, yesterday when your father walked into the convention, I knew I'd seen him before. As soon as my dad saw him, he recognized him too and yanked me away with some excuse that Max needed my help back at the factory. Max and Henry kept trying to entertain me on the ride home with stories of the olden days in the factory, which I usually love. But something about your dad and the way he looked at me before my dad yanked me away kept nagging at me. Right before we got back to Springhaven, I realized where I'd seen him. And then I knew who you were. I blurted it all out in the car. Then Henry filled me in on your side of the story. I didn't think you and Henry had spoken more than 2 words to each other. I just wanted to tell you I never blamed you for what happened to me. I was just a kid, and I thought that if I could get your truck back for you, we could be friends. I just wasn't thinking when I reached into that vat. Last night when my parents came home, I told them I wanted to start the tours up again and the annual picnic. And when it looked like they didn't want to, I told them that I don't mind so much when people look at me for like a minute too long. It's not their fault. They're not trying to be hurtful, and the burns will get better. They already are. I know you were just trying to protect yourself by being kind of awful when you first came back to the factory. It was probably hard for you not to tell me who you were, and I'm kind of glad you didn't, with everything else going on. These last few days with you and Miles and Daisy have been the greatest days of my life, and I've had a lot of great days. You guys all treated me like I wasn't any different at all, and that's all I want. I've never worked so hard on anything before the Harmonic Candy Project, and now I know I can. Anyway, this is the longest letter I've ever written. I hope you'll come back to the factory to hang out. I promise if you throw me something and I miss it, that I won't climb into another vat of chocolate. Your friend, Logan. P.S. No more secrets, okay? Philip blinked a few times as the note rustled in the breeze. He realized they'd reached the center of the lake. Daisy had crossed the oars over her lap and was watching him. "So," she asked, "what did it say?" He hesitated for a moment, not sure if he really wanted to show them, but Logan was right. No more secrets. He handed Daisy the note and hoped they wouldn't hate him when they read it. With shaking hands, he unwrapped the box. Inside sat a small plastic truck on a bed of cotton. His truck. Clutching it in his hand, he turned around and looked back at the beach. He could barely make out Logan lying on the sand, the bright orange life vest beneath his head, no doubt trying to decide what the cloud above him resembled. Philip looked up. A bubble-tastic chocolate rocket, he decided. Definitely. A Harmonic candy, Logan decided. Definitely. Then he turned away from the cloud and sat up. He tried to slide his finger under the flap of Daisy's envelope. When that didn't work, he ripped off the top, hoping he wasn't harming anything inside. He reached in and pulled out a photograph with a small note attached in Daisy's handwriting. If nothing ever changed, there'd be no such things as butterflies. XO, Daisy. He smiled. She was right. He lifted off the note to see the photo underneath. It took a few seconds to register what he was looking at. Was that him? He brought the picture closer. It had been taken a long time ago, before the accident. The little kid in the picture had no scars on his face and neck, only a wide grin. The butterfly on the tip of his nose was hard to miss. Yellow and black and red, just like the one in the chrysalis. Like the ones in the chrysalises every year. So a butterfly really had visited him before, even if he didn't remember it. This picture was proof. Maybe no one ever got to witness the exact moment of transformation. Maybe some things were just meant to be private. It finally occurred to him to wonder who had taken the picture and how Daisy had wound up with it. He'd asked when they'd returned, or maybe he wouldn't. He lay back down, the photo resting on his chest. By now Philip would have read the note. The others probably had too, which meant that there were no more secrets between them anymore. Well, except for maybe one. Someday he'd tell Philip that the Stradivarius was actually made by Samuel Sweet, grandfather, candy factory founder and wood carving enthusiast. But not yet. After all, they'd be busy for a while. They were candy makers now, and they had a whole lot of candy to make. And that's the Candymakers.